Welcome to DevTech News, presented by Logic Solutions.
Hi, I'm Young, and this is DevTech News, where we sit down with seasoned developers to break down the hottest trends in software and how they can drive real results for your business. And our topic for today is RAG, which is Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And in our show today, we have Doug, who's the Senior Technical and Business Consultant at Logic Solutions, and Bo Yu, who's the Director of AI at Logic Solutions. So Doug, can you please start us off by telling us what RAG is exactly?
Sure. It's not a something you wipe your car with or clean your counters with in your kitchen. As you mentioned, it's Retrieval-Augmented Generation. And so that refers to reaching into let's call it compartmentalized body of knowledge. Imagine a container like Wikipedia or something contained, reaching in and retrieving your answers to your question based on only that material. And I think, I don't know, Bill, you could probably put a technical spin on that.
So in the RAG system, there is, you have your knowledge, right? You would feed that into a database where when the user queries for something, the LLM can go into that database and pull out the right answers instead of making something up.
And the good news is you can reduce hallucinations and not have fake citations. So that's improving the accuracy of information. Also, over time, as that information becomes outdated, you could update it and make it more current.
Okay, so quick question. I use spreadsheets pretty often, and they have Copilot on there now. And I use that to kind of help analyze the data on my spreadsheets. Like I can have contacts on there and it'll find patterns for me. Like what are the most titles they have, what industry they're in. Is that also RAG as well, or is that something else?
That's kind of RAG, but I don't think it's going to satisfy Buyu's technical definition of RAG, because it is just pulling out of a container, right? It is looking into a container, but Buyu, why isn't that technically RAG?
If we go to like the very basic definition, right? You're pulling something out from a container. Yeah, sure it is. But then in real implementations of RAG, normally there's something called a vector database where we can store a lot of information on, and that the LLM can query. So, so let's say spreadsheets, right? There's actually an upper limit to how much data you can store in a spreadsheet. But with a database, it is pretty much the more hard drive you can add to a computer or a server, the more you can store in a database. So going back to spreadsheet and Copilot, I'm going to say that it's probably more putting data from the spreadsheet into the prompt than to put into a database.
Okay,
Yeah.
So Doug, can you explain how is RAG often applied in business solutions?
Sure. So a couple scenarios come to mind. Anytime you need current vertical knowledge would be great. So one instance could be HR systems. So you could take all the policies and HR documentation that you have and put it in the RAG and be able to retrieve information for your question just based on that information. Imagine instead going out to an LLM, Anthropic or Claude or ChatGPT, and saying, "Hey, what's my HR policy for vacation days? What's my HR policy for bereavement? And how's it going to know that?" Right? It's got to really query the information that's germane into that, again, that container of information that you have.
Bowie, do you have any, like other common use cases for RAG?
So at Logic Solutions, we actually help the client with an education platform where we use RAG to update the latest policies, and then where our client can use that to teach their users about the latest policy changes and also how to become a better negotiator. So that's also another application of RAG.
So it also another application that we did for a client is, imagine market information behind a firewall, or market information that's curated by a research company that maybe sells it. You could take that market information and load your database with that market information, and so your questions would then be pulled from that. So you're asking a question and you're retrieving chunks of information from that container, and then the LLM is just used to put it together and your answer.
What are the components needed to
Yeah.
implement RAG?
So there's 5 components to implement RAG. First, you need your knowledge base, which is kind of what we said earlier about Doug. You were saying was it the latest market research, right? So that's like the knowledge, or like your company specific HR knowledge. So that's the knowledge, and there is a embedding model. There is a vector database, there's a retrieval engine, and then there's a LLM. So with the embedding model is important because what it does is it converts knowledge into embeddings, which is just a bunch of numbers that is being stored into the vector database. And then we have the retrieval engine and the LLM. So a user might ask the LLM about a question that pulls data from the vector database. That will go through the retrieval engine, which converts what the user asks into vectors to query the vector database.
Something that I learned recently, because I was struggling with embedding, and I'm like, okay, so I know what a vector database is. Anything, it's n space, right? It's not just X, Y, and Z. You can have all these different vectors that describe things, and they're all essentially, they get converted to numerical descriptions of an attribute, essentially, that describe that thing that you're doing. And I'm like, how in the world would one put it into there? And the good news is, I learned from one of our developers that there's Python scripts that do that. And they're like, okay, you run these Python scripts, and it will literally take your data, and it'll literally convert it and put it into the vector database. So
that's what the embedding model does. So the Python script uses the embedding model to convert knowledge into vectors and then put it into the vector database.
It's kind of like when I first started learning about an LLM. It was just a black box, and it just works. So I like the fact that we have these 5 areas, and that from a business application, if you want data that's not made up and you want data that's current, as current as you will keep it, it's a great business application for store of knowledge.
And are there any barriers when it comes to applying RAG?
Certainly there's a knowledge barrier. So you definitely want to work with a company or individuals that have experience doing that. The second thing I would say is there might be an associated cost with that for a skill set or some infrastructure. I mean, what are your thoughts, Buyu, on what the barriers are?
Yeah, Doug, just to elaborate on what you said, I think that skill and knowledge is definitely important. At Logic, we had a client who implemented RAG. However, they did not implement it correctly. So their data weren't being pulled out from a vector database. It was from the LLM itself. And that's something our engineers were able to find out and help them fix.
In fact, they discovered it because the client's like, hey, this is no better than an LLM. Why are we using RAG if it's no better? And once we looked into it, we found that to be the case. It wasn't using RAG properly.
Did they make that mistake just because they didn't have the correct expertise, or do you think it was something else? Just that.
I know they were going fast internally. They were relying on very few people, and there was a lot of pressure to move forward. And now that the team's more expansive, I think I think it corrected those kinds of situations.
Also, RAG is relatively new. There is a lot of resources online on how to build a RAG system, but there isn't as much information on validating the efficiency of it, or if it's actually being implemented properly.
Since you guys are mentioning how we've done it for clients, do you have any specific tips for application?
We would definitely, come in and talk to people and kind of understand whether it's RAG is something that they need or not, or if an LLM would suffice, or perhaps another solution altogether. I mean, there's no sense in doing AI for the sake of AI. And so I think, there just needs to be kind of an intelligent look at the situation and finding out what the business problem is that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, I think that's very important what Doug just said about the business problem. We don't want to solve software problems. Software is just a tool on how we solve business problems. Sometimes a problem might not need AI. It might just need a Python script. But I think that'll depend on the requirements, right? So everything has pros and cons, and that's what we do in software engineering. We evaluate the pros and cons.
Great. Okay, that's our time for today's DevTech News. Thank you everyone for joining. Please make sure to subscribe to this series, and until next time.